Welcome! Today we're going to talk about order of operations. In order to understand the order of operations, it's a good idea to understand the directions. You will be asked to simplify an expression or to evaluate an expression. Now the words simplify and evaluate, they basically mean the same thing. The only difference is that one of them is for a numerical expression, meaning an expression. Remember, expressions are math operations that do not have equal signs. Numerical expression is an expression that just has numbers in it. To evaluate, you evaluate algebraic expressions, and algebraic expressions have variables in them, and you know the value of the variable, so you just replace the variable. So the word simplify in this case, it's used like crazy in math, but for today, simplify basically just means to condense or shorten so that all like terms have been combined. In this case, when we're talking about numerical expressions, all numbers are like terms. So what we're just going to say here is we are going to perform all possible operations. And later, we will talk about exactly what it means when I say combine like terms. So here we're just going to perform all possible operations. Now evaluate. Let's take a look at evaluate. Evaluate also just means to simplify, but in this case you're going to have variables and you'll be told what the variables represent. So what we're going to do here is we simply replace the variables. So replace variables with numbers and perform indicated operations. Or I'll even just say, and perform all operations, which again, we just learned operations, performing all operations is really the same as just simplify. So basically, you're just going to keep going until you can't go any longer. Now, the order of this is important. You do have to go in a separate or in an exact order. Now, the order of operations is simply this. You may have heard already of PEMDAS. And PEMDAS is an acronym that tells you what order to go in. And sometimes when you get to the high school, I've heard them also call it GAMA. And we'll talk about what both of those mean. So the first operation is parentheses or grouping symbols. So hence the P. P stands with parentheses, grouping symbols stands for, or starts with a G. So here we're going to either put parentheses or grouping symbols. And grouping symbols would, in this case, a lot of times just be a fraction bar or brackets. So that sort of thing you have to look at first. And if you've got more than one grouping symbol, then you perform the operations that are in that grouping symbol or above or below that grouping symbol in the correct order. Now the next thing, E, right here, both of them have an E, is exponents. So those exponents are those little tiny numbers. You then just perform those. Then the next thing that you're going to do is your multiplication and division. Now, here it just says multiplication. That's really multiplication and division. The reason we don't say the gamma doesn't go MD is because sometimes people think that you go multiplication first and then division first, but it doesn't matter. You can do division first. So you can do the multiplication and then division. You must do what comes first. So if the division comes before the multiplication, then you have to do the division first. So in this case, the M stands for multiplication and division. So you do all the multiplication and division in the order that it comes in the problem. And then the last part is addition and subtraction. So over here with gamma, they just say addition because it's implied. You do all the addition and all the subtraction. Here, addition and subtraction. So in this little chart here, notice the arrows. The arrows are saying that it doesn't matter, well, it does matter which one you do first, but you don't always do addition first, and you don't always do subtraction first. You do what comes first in the problem. So let's try a couple of these. All right, now I know you've done this before, but the problems now might start to look a little bit more complicated. So we're going to start first with parentheses and grouping symbols. If you look right here, we've got 3 sets of parentheses and then this grouping symbol right here. What this fraction bar is telling you is that you have to perform everything on the top and everything on the bottom. Then you do your division or your reducing if it's a fraction that you can't divide evenly. So in this case, since you have 3 sets of parentheses, it is okay to do all 3 sets of parentheses first. Now, showing your work is important, and we are going to work in a V shape. And I don't want you to forget the fraction bar. A lot of times people will just write down the top, do the top, and then write down the bottom, do the bottom, and then make it a fraction. But the problem that I've seen with that is that if people do that, they often forget the bottom. So they just do the top, and then they're like, oh, I'm done. So in this case, I don't want you to forget about the fraction bar. So we are going to work down, and we are going to keep the fraction bar in the problem. So the way you show your work, pretty important. So let's start with 8 minus 1. We know 8 minus 1 is 7. Once you're done with that, you can write 7 times 7. The parentheses can go away. You can even write the 7 still in parentheses. Plus 42 divided by 3 is 14. And now I'm going to put the fraction bar, and then in the fraction bar, under the fraction bar, I can also do 10 minus 7, and 10 minus 7 is 3. So at the bottom, I have 3 times 3. Now I'm going to show you, you can also write it like that. So I don't really care if you end up writing it like the top part up here or if you write it like the bottom part. Doesn't matter, whatever looks best to you. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, exponents. If you look at this, there are no exponents. So now we're going to move on to multiplication and division. So if you look at the top, there is some multiplication. If you look at the bottom, there's some multiplication. So we're going to multiply the top first, which is going to give us 49 plus 14. And we can go ahead and multiply the bottom as well. So over 9. Now let's go ahead and do our addition and subtraction. So the top still, 49 plus 14 is 63. And then we do 63 over 9. And 63 divided by 9 is 7. So we would say our answer is 7. Here, I'll put it right here. 7 is our final answer. Let's try the next one. Number 2. So if you feel pretty confident that you can try this problem without me, go ahead and stop the recording and try it, and then make sure you tune back in to make sure that you've done it correctly. So here, we start first with parentheses and grouping symbols. A big mistake lots of people do is they often look at this 40, they often look at the 40 minus 2 and write 38 there. Can't do that. You have to do the parentheses first. So inside the parentheses, we are going to do 3 squared. Now I'm going to go ahead and rewrite 40 minus 2. Leave my parentheses because I've got multiple things going on in the parentheses. You have 5 plus 9, then plus 6. Now inside those parentheses, we have 5 plus 9, and 5 plus 9 is 14. So now I have 40 minus 2 times 14 plus 6. Now side note here, I could have just written this as 40 minus 2 times 14 like this. Plus 6. Whichever way you like better works. I'm going to stick with the first way I wrote it. So now if I look, I'm still not going to do 40 minus 2 because what comes next is multiplication. So in that multiplication, you've got to do 2 times 14, and 2 times 14 is 28. So now I have 40 minus 28 plus 6. And so now I'm going to do my addition and subtraction. Now this is the case where you might think, oh, I should do the addition first, but nope, you have to go in order from left to right. So I'm going to do 40 minus 28, and then I'm going to add the 6. So 40 minus 28 is 12, and 12 plus 6 is 18. Final answer, 18, totally simplified. Let's move on to the next one. Now this one, number 3, says evaluate. And the only difference between evaluate and simplify is that evaluate, I'm giving you what these variables represent, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug them in. Now, lots of people try to do all this work in their head. That's totally not allowed. If you give me just an answer on a quiz, I won't give you any points for it. I really want to see your work. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to write the problem exactly as you see it, but we're going to replace the variables with the numbers. So we are going to start first with x is 5. So let's replace that x with a 5. So I'm going to put 5 put the parenthesis. Now, negative y just means we're going to put a negative sign in front of the y. The value of y is 8, so that means it just becomes negative 8. So I've got negative 8 plus w. W is negative 1, so I'm going to put negative 1 here and square it. Now, I also want to point out to you that you could make this brackets, and you could put, you might see the negative 1 written in parentheses as well. Another thing you might see is that plus a negative is basically the same as subtracting, right? So let me just rewrite it because I kind of made that a little bit messy. So I'm going to say 5, I'm going to put a bracket, negative 8 plus negative 1 in parentheses, close my bracket, and square it. So sometimes you'll just see that written in textbooks and that sort of stuff. You don't have to have the parentheses there at all. So now in this case, you have to do what's inside the parentheses first. So we're going to do negative 8 plus negative 1, which is negative 9. Now in this case, the parentheses can't go away. The reason the parentheses can't go away is because you have this little exponent up here. So what I have is 5 times negative 9 squared. So now the next thing, exponents, you have to do the exponents first. So you're not going to do 5 times negative 9, you're going to do negative 9 squared. Now negative 9 squared is negative 9 times negative 9, which is 81. So then I have 5 times 81. Again, you could leave the 81 still in parentheses, and then 5 times 81 gives us 405. So the solution to this is 405. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, again, number 4, if you feel like you can turn off the video and try it, go for it, and then come back and see how you did. So, replacing the w and the x. So I'm going to have 2 parentheses, negative w. Now here, w is already negative 1. So if I'm going to have negative 1, what that really is just a 1. A double negative is a positive. So instead of writing negative 1, I'm just going to simplify it in my head and put a 1 there. So 1 minus x is 5, so I'm going to do 1 minus 5. Again, you have a fraction bar. Write the fraction bar and write what goes on the bottom. So now I have y is 8, so I have 8 minus x is 5. You have in parentheses w plus 4, so that's negative 1 plus 4. All right, again, since you've got a fraction bar, you can do what's on top and what's on bottom at the same time. So on the top, I've got 1 minus 5 inside my parentheses I have to do, so that's going to give me 2 times negative 4. I'm going to go ahead and write the negative 4 in parentheses, fraction bar. And then down here, don't do 8 minus 5. You have to do what's in parentheses first. And what's in parentheses is negative 1 plus 4. And negative 1 plus 4 is 3. So again, I can write 8 minus 5 times 3, or I can just go ahead and keep the 3 in the parentheses, because numbers next to each other in parentheses means multiply. All right, so now the next step, I'm going to go ahead and bring it on up here. The next step, look at the top. 2 times negative 4. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And then the bottom, I don't do 8 minus 5 first. You have to do 5 minus 3 first. So I have 8 minus 15. And now the last thing I have to do is 8 minus 15. Now 8 minus 15 is on the bottom. That's negative 7. So now I have this weird answer. It says negative 8 over negative 7. Now that means negative 8 divided by negative 7. But I don't want you to do that because 7 doesn't go into 8 evenly. So what we're going to do is we're just going to write this answer as a fraction. Now I do want to point out to you though that it's a negative over a negative. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So to fully simplify it, we have to say this is a positive. And we are allowed to just go ahead and say that this is positive 8/7. You're allowed to write your answers in improper fraction if you'd like. Or make it a mixed number. 7 goes into 8 one time. There's 1 left over. So it's 1 and 1/7. Done. All right, number 5. I would recommend that you watch me do this problem first before actually going through and doing it yourself. However, if you're like, whatever, Mrs. Rocket, I got this, go ahead and try it. The reason I'm doing that is because if you look, M is 2/3. So what we're going to have here is this ugly fraction. But don't freak out, because we love fractions, right? So we've got 2/3 on the top minus x. X is 5. Now, I'm going to think ahead now. Instead of writing 2/3 minus 5, I'm going to write minus 5 over 1. Because I'm going to have to combine those two things, right? Now, I've got a fraction bar, so put that fraction bar there. over y plus w. So I have 8 plus negative 1 plus negative 1. And you could write here, you don't have to have the parentheses, you also could just write 8 minus 1 at the bottom. All right, so now this problem looks super ugly, hence the reason we say evaluate or simplify this. So let's look at the top first. Don't freak out. We know how to do 2/3 minus 5 over 1. We need a common denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, my common denominator has to be 3. So I'm going to leave the 2/3 alone. And the 15 over 1, well I'm sorry, 5 over 1 is just going to give us 15 over 3 because we multiplied the top and the bottom by 3. So now the bottom, 8 plus negative 1, well that's easy. That's 7. So let's just go ahead and combine that. That's 7. So now the top does not look nearly as scary. What I have is 2/3 minus 15 over 3. So we just subtract the numerators. 2 minus 15 is negative 13/3. So I'll go ahead and move up here. So we've got negative 13/3, the whole thing over 7. Now that right there is a complex fraction. We've dealt with this before. We just do negative 13/3 divided by 7 over 1, or you can skip that step if you can do this part in your head. Negative 13/3 times 1/7. And again with multiplication, if you could cross cancel, you could, but in this case we can't. So we're just going to multiply straight across. So negative 13 times 1 is negative 13, and 3 times 7 is 21. And so we get negative 13 over 21. And if we could reduce that, we could, but we're done. All right, so now flip this paper over and start some of the problems on the back. Notice that the answers to the problems on the back are at the very bottom of the page. So as you are going through and working through the problems, just check as you go. And if you made a mistake, help each other.